Serious Reddit, what's your scariest, most disturbing true story? Not nearly as serious, but a little creepy. My neighbor is an old lady. She comes outside everyone once in a while to chat with passerbys and guard the first conversation she had with my dad. She complimented the painting he has hanging in his bedroom. No big deal. She probably saw us moving it in, or glimpsed it at some point, before we got curtains. But then she meets our dog and says, well, he's much scarier through the window. IST, again. NBD, we know he has a habit of pushing aside blinds to stare outside. She comments on things like this often, asking us why we didn't walk our dog that morning, or when we got a new sofa. But she's just an old lady, right? She's probably bored and outside a lot. Then she meets me. She swears she's already met me, but I had never seen her before in my life. She asks me how I like my room, and tells me about the girls who had it before me. Weird, but okay. She rubbed me the wrong way, but I don't really mind, she's fairly easy to avoid. Or so I thought. As I was taking the dog outside, I happened to glance over and see her staring at me through the window. She lowers the blinds when she sees that I saw her, but is peeking through them watching me. Later, I go to the kitchen and see her again watching me very intently through the window. Our blinds were slightly open to let light in. Then upstairs in my parents' room there's a window in their bathroom. I see her again as I'm replacing the towels, watching. The more I looked for her, the more I saw. She was watching basically all the time. Not only from her window, she sits in her car and watches us from the street. She sits on her porch and watches. She slowly walks down the street and watches us literally all hours of the day. And she does it to her other neighbors, and she did it to the people who had our house before us. Everyone knew to keep your blinds and curtains shut at all times. Otherwise you can guarantee she watches you. It freaked me the hell out. Recently a friend and I were swapping our favorite horror movies. We were childhood friends that grew up in the same Detroit suburb. I was thinking about an incident that had happened when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade 30 years ago, and she says out of the blue, I don't know if you remember this, but the police started patrolling our neighborhood when we were in 2nd or 3rd grade, because when I was walking home from school 2 men in a blue pickup truck rolled down the window next to me and said, hey girl, you need a ride home, and one tried to grab me. I took off running, tearing through yards, and I told my mom, who called the cops and walked with me to the bus stop after that. I confessed that I was thinking about a time when my cousin Scene recently passed away, so has been on my mind. Also, he was really smart, much smarter than I, and I were wandering around the neighborhood like kids did in the 80s. This blue pickup truck pulled up to us, and one of the 2 guys asked us to hop in for a ride. Scene said no thanks, and instructed me to sneak into a neighbor's back porch, luckily unlocked, and stay down. I whispered I was afraid we would get in trouble for not asking the neighbor for permission. Not the brightest kid. I would rather die than break the rules, I guess. And Scene goes, stay here and hide. Act like we went inside, because we live here. One of the 2 guys got out of the truck and went into the yard to look for us. We laid low. About 15 minutes later he left. I look back on it now and think what a close call. We lived near the area of the Oakland County child killer, though in a much poorer neighbor than he targeted, and I've spent the last few nights reading about the case and thinking about that blue truck. My ex-husband kidnapped my kids. A church was helping him hide them from me. I was a Catholic, therefore an idol worshipper, and he was Baptist. He wasn't religious when we got married, but was in his past. I guess when he hits a life crisis his answer is the nearest mega church. He was in the army and told them I was killed in a car wreck and had to go get the kids. Then he went into hiding. I got a colonel up at 3 AM and he was back with the kids in 72 hours. Scariest weekend of my life. A few years ago I went to the kitchen around 2 AM to get a glass of water. I figured, why put the lights on if I'm gonna be done in 5 seconds, right? So, 10-year-old me was in complete darkness when I noticed someone staring through our window with their hands pressed against the glass. We had see-through curtains. I screamed at the top of my lungs and froze. Mom woke up and came running to the kitchen to me crying like a baby in my pajamas. He was already gone, but I told her what happened, so she went outside with a knife to look for him, but never found him. And that's why we don't have see-through curtains anymore. I still have an irrational fear of the dark. I was on a backpacking trip on the Appalachian Trail, and my dad and I stopped at one of the many public cabins. We set our bags down and joined the campfire. It was just us and a middle-aged Asian couple. We begin talking, and the sun sets, so we don't expect anyone else to come. Nevertheless, this huge guy with long silver hair sets his small pack down under the awning and joins us at the fire. He was no less than 68, extremely muscular, and had his hair tied back into a ponytail. Imagine a more muscular Geralt from The Witcher. We start talking, and he seems very friendly. Then, my dad asks the man, "So, where are you from?" No response. My dad repeats the question, thinking the guy didn't hear him. No response. The Asian guy asks the question, and suddenly, the big guy explodes yelling, "I don't know. I don't fucking know." He then takes out a huge Bowie knife and a whetstone and starts sharpening it. All of us decide to pack our stuff and book it to the next cabin, which was about 7 miles away. It was a walk, but we eventually made it there, and there was a dirty hippie dude already there. He stunk like hell, but was harmless. We stop at the campfire hangout for a bit, then I see a reflection out of the corner of my eye. I turn around and see the big, silver-haired guy standing in the tree line, spying on us. At that moment, I nearly shat my pants, because there was no way all of us could take this guy on. He was built like a WWE wrestler, and we were all under 6 feet. I'll let the other people know, and the Asian guy took out a revolver and told the man to go the frick off. Big guy stands there for a moment and silently walks off into the woods without making any sound. After that incident, we agreed to have someone keep watch. Since the Asian guy had a gun, he volunteered while we slept. In the morning, I was so glad big guy didn't come back, because Asian man fell asleep. That shoot still gives me chills. TL. Doctor run into large creepy man on Appalachian trailer, who follows us until someone pulls a gun on him. A guy followed me home from the train station once. I think he still knows where I live. I got out of work and was waiting at the train station. I had my headphones in and was staring at the TV with the arrival/departure times. This guy suddenly appeared out of nowhere, got really close to my face, and asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said nothing and walked away quickly. He looked/smelled homeless and had these big crazy eyes that were darting around the room as he spoke. He also had an erection and had gotten so close that head spit on my cheek. There are weird people at train stations. Whatever. I'll never see him again anyway. Move on. After I get off the train, I take 2 buses and walk a few blocks to get home. I was focused on the podcast that I was listening to and wasn't paying attention to my surroundings. All of the buses were also very crowded. When I reached my stop and started to walk home, I noticed that the creepy guy got off the bus behind me. There was nobody else around, so ran home. When I got to my door and started to unlock it, he was standing at the end of my driveway. I was crying and fumbling with my keys. Then some of my neighbors pulled up in a truck, and I screamed, "Hello, sir, help." Then the creepy guy turned and walked away into the woods. I called the police, but they didn't show up for a while. They had me write a statement, but seemed uninterested. My husband left work early and came home. We saw the creepy guy lingering around the neighborhood and walking past our house a few times in the following days, but he eventually stopped. Haven't seen him since. I was in Italy near the Alps when I was around 7, and I would walk down the hill to play with this kid that lived there, even though neither of us could understand each other. The kid had a dog that we would play with too. One day when I walked down there, the whole yard was covered in bugs. They might have been locusts or some equivalent, but they were everywhere. I was about to turn and run, but I saw a mess in the middle of the yard. I then realized it was the dog, just laying, covered in bugs. I thought it might be dead, but I ran to it and pulled on his collar. He just looked up at me, then put his head back down. I kept pulling, and I was yelling for the neighbor kid. No one responded. I then convinced the dog to get up, and at this point bugs were also covering me, and I was terrified. I pulled the dog into this shed and I hid in there with him and cried. I think I was in there for like 10 minutes and there was a knock. It was the neighbor looking at me through the window. He opened the door and started yelling at me, but I couldn't understand him. I looked behind him, and the yard, that was previously covered in a plague of bugs, was now empty. I tried explaining what happened, but it was all lost in translation. I didn't go back over there again. In high school, me and a buddy made the dumbest decision to smoke weed in a graveyard around 8 to 9 at night summertime, so it was just now getting dark. I smoked to the point of being totally out of it. We were just chilling next to a tree when I see a man walking down the graveyard. I got a little nervous immediately, but blew it off. I then see the man pull out a handgun and aim towards something. He didn't notice us at this point, and I couldn't see who or what he was aiming it at. I was so terrified I thought I was mildly hallucinating. I couldn't even move. My friend hid my side and said, "Dude, this guy has a freaking gun out. We gotta get the frick out of here." We both slowly got up, but like the stoned idiots we were, we hit a rock trying to get up, and the man finally noticed us. He was a good 200 feet away from us, but the second he saw it, he slowly moved towards us with the gun in his hand. We started running at this point. I looked behind my shoulder once and saw him start to run towards us as well. We booked it out of the graveyard and were finally back in my neighborhood. I was terrified for days after that. When I was 12, I saw two tourists struggling to communicate with the cashier at a bookstore in Indonesia. I'm bilingual, so I just hopped over and helped translate before going back to browsing my books. After paying, one of the guys came over to thank me. He wanted to take me out for dinner to repay me. Being 12, of course I told him I can't have dinner without my parents' permission. He went, "I'm sure you can sneak out, right?" No. By now, I noticed his friend came up behind me, so I'm kind of boxed between them in the middle of two bookshelves. My sister had already ducked under one and ran off, leaving me alone. They were really persistent and asked me if I could grab lunch or drinks instead. I'm 12. Finally, one of the sales girls noticed something was off and came to ask if anything's wrong. I got the frick out of there. My sister and I went to another store, and suddenly, my sister started freaking out since they were right behind us. Okay, maybe it's a coincidence. We went to a lingerie store. They followed. Okay, we're definitely being followed. We ran to the store our mom was in, and the salespeople there called security. I thought they were slightly creepy at that time, but now that I'm older, holy shoot, they were freaking creepy. Oh, and Imation. So at 12, I looked 8 to 9. My girlfriend and I went to Walmart one night at about 11:30. We parked close with only one spot open to us on our left. As we were slowly making our ways down the grocery aisles, I happened to notice a guy out of the corner of my eye with no buggy or cart. When I looked over, he grabbed a box of something and stared intently at it. You know, not the kind of absent-minded I'm shopping kind of look. I make a side note of it, and we continue down a few more aisles. After seeing the man in our aisles and vicinity a few more times, I tell my girlfriend, let's go aimlessly wander around other parts of the store for a bit, so I can gauge if my suspicions are correct. About 30 minutes later, we end up at the self-checkout. Guess who is sitting on the bench in front of the self-checkout with no bags? I think to myself, maybe coincidence, maybe not. As we leave the Walmart, all of a sudden I get this feeling and tell my girlfriend to stop, and I stop abruptly as well. When I turn around, this guy has almost run into us. He was following so closely, and we had stopped so abruptly. He stared at me like a deer in headlights, and so did I, because I couldn't really mentally process the implications of what he presumably intended to do. After a brief deer in headlights, he keeps walking like nothing happened, then gets into a windowless white van that is now occupying the empty left parking spot next to my car. This was a few years ago, and I still think about it a lot and what could have happened. There were too many coincidences for that to merely be my anxiety interpreting the situation as something it wasn't. This is actually kind of embarrassing, but anyways, last year I was watching my parents' house while they were out of the state. They live on a wooded plot of land and have been known to have trespassers on their property. I got home one night at about 11 PM and am standing in the foyer, and the way the foyer is, I can see into the kitchen, which has windows. The only light in the house is the moonlight coming in the windows. Against the light I can see the silhouette of someone standing there. My heart immediately started slamming against my chest, and I ask who's there. No answer. I ask again, and as I'm asking I'm moving my keys that I was holding into the spaces between my fingers, so I had a weapon. Again there was no answer. I start moving, and the figure starts moving too, exactly the same way I was. I put 2 and 2 together, and I flick on the lights and I see a reflection of myself in the mirror that's in the foyer. I witnessed an argument between my mom and stepdad about some green Heinz ketchup my mom had bought. His response was to drag my mother by her hair to the bedroom where he loaded a shotgun, then pressed his head against hers and tried to force her to pull the trigger. All the while I'm standing in the doorway watching in complete silence. She ended up saving herself by putting her finger behind the trigger and was left with a blood blister from him trying to pull it regardless. She eventually wriggled free and he says, "I'm just going to kill myself then." To which my mom responds with, "Well, do it outside." Because I really don't feel like cleaning up the mess. That took balls. He could have just shot her right there. What's crazy is at the time it all seemed so normal to me. I ran on the track team in high school, and during my first 2 years, I rode the late after school bus to get home. On Tuesday, Thursday there were 2 buses that took students home, but on Mondays and Fridays everyone had to ride one bus and the bus was driven by this really creepy guy. He would look at girls through the rear view mirror and stare at them for lengthy periods of time, while giving this really unsettling smile which made all of the girls uncomfortable. One day this guy was the bus driver who took our team to a track meet at another school. The buses would normally stay parked in the parking lot for the duration of the meet. Well, I had a while until my next race, so I decided to go and watch my teammates run, and I went to watch by the gate which was near the track's entrance. It started to drizzle, so I go to stand under this pavilion to keep dry, and after a few minutes I see the bus driver there, and he comes over to me and asks me if I want to get on the bus to keep out of the rain. At this point, I'm really nervous, but I say yes anyway because I'm afraid of what will happen if I say no. So the 2 of us start heading to the bus, and I'm freaking out when a few of my male teammates see that I'm about to get on the bus and they decide that they want to get out of the rain too. They come over to the bus as I'm about to get on and ask if they can get on, but the bus driver shakes his head and says, "Not you guys. Just her." Now I'm really scared, and I stutter out that I'm sorry, but I don't want to go on the bus anymore, and I take off to the bleachers where I stayed for the rest of the meet. Even though nothing happened, I still get sort of queasy thinking about what could have happened if those guys hadn't come and I had gone on the bus. But it's really not that bad, and maybe there are some other explanations, and maybe it's not actually my most disturbing true story, but I've been thinking about it the last few days. So near where I live is this little place called Concrete City. It's just this circle of empty concrete buildings that used to be homes to coal miners or something like that, but it is totally abandoned now and some of the structures are crumbling. It's like a giant concrete playground for young adults to smoke up, tag the walls, and play paintball. So me and a couple others are wandering around the place, and we start coming up on this parked car. I could 2 people in the front shuffling around, and I was just thinking, oh great, we're about to walk up on 2 people screwing. Nobody else in the group seemed to pay it any mind, so I keep walking. Then I notice it's not a couple. 2 big dudes are in the front, staring us the frick down, sitting stock still, and looking shady as frick. Still, we all just keep going, and at this point, I'm just glad we're in a group of 5 and still kind of worried we're about to get fricked, as in, chopped to bits and spread around in piles. And then I see why I get this exact feeling. We're all right up alongside the car now, and I can't help but glance in the back window. An open cooler filled with bloody ice, a second, closed cooler, probably filled with the same, and a pile of clear plastic bags. I keep my mouth shut and keep walking. When we're just past the car, the engine revs up, and those 2 dudes tear out of there like hell's behind them. So it could be a couple of poachers, or maybe organ theft, and somewhere in Concrete City lay a man with a missing kidney. I dunno, but it was shady as frick.